citing an event told by one of ancient humanity's most esteemed intellectuals. Over the course of this video, I am going to reconstruct how Native Americans from North Carolina may have arrived on the shores of Europe over 1,500 years before Christopher Columbus discovered America. After investigating the event, I am left with one question. If it is possible, and it was documented as fact with accurate historical context by an otherwise reliable source, well then, what would be the reason that it didn't happen? According to the Roman author Pliny the Elder, when Cornelius Nepos, a biographer, was discussing the possibility of a circumnavigation of northern Europe in a long-lost text, he described an extraordinary occurrence. Around 62 BC, the Roman consul Quintus Caecilius Metellus Celer, who was at the time proconsul in Gaul, modern-day northern Italy, had a present made to him by the king of Suevi of certain Indians who, sailing from India for the purpose of commerce, had been driven by tempests into Germany. Pliny the Elder shares this story to drive home the point that the earth is a sphere comprised of oceans that surround every body of land. Let's examine the world as Pliny the Elder understood it when this hypothesis was written. In natural history, he appears to have supposed that the continent of Asia terminated a little above the northern extremity of the Caspian Sea, beyond which he describes there being vast deserts inhabited by multitudes of wild beasts, which are continually lying in wait, ready to fall upon human beings as savage as themselves. No loss of love there. Beyond these tribes comes more desert tracts tenanted by wild beasts, until a chain of mountains is reached which runs up to the sea. Strabo, in his work Geography, which was started around 7 BC, reports the Greek mathematician Eratosthenes, who was born in 276 BC and very nearly calculated the exact circumference of the earth, stated that it was theoretically possible to sail from Spain to Asia. Obviously, there might have been a person of Mediterranean origin and antiquity who, via the Silk Road or other obscure means, traveled to East Asia. But whether or not ancient geographers were aware of the existence of much of the territory now encompassing China at all in 77 AD, when Pliny the Elder completed his encyclopedic natural history, is subject to debate. I'd just like to clarify the broad academic consensus, or lack thereof, concerning the Earth's geography when Pliny the Elder shared the story of Indians washing up on the shores of Germany. Aside from the size of the mythic islands of the Blessed, through no fault of their own, ancient Mediterranean scholars had absolutely no conceptualization of the existence of the North and South American continents. As far as they were concerned, there was a practically endless ocean between them and Asia. Anything foreign that arrived from beyond the western coast of Europe's ocean rim would have incorrectly been considered by Pliny the Elder to be Indian or Asian. If human beings of an unrecognizable appearance who spoke an unknown language did arrive on the shores of 1st century BC Europe, who were they? I've read some authors suggest the arrivals would have been Inuit, a tribe from America's Arctic, sometimes referred to as Eskimos, though I'm not sure they're huge fans of that term. They theorize Inuit hunters strayed too far from their usual fishing grounds and were pulled by ocean currents into the North Sea. The idea is supported by much later, well-documented cases of mysterious finmen in sealskin kayaks fishing off the coasts of the Northern Isles of Scotland. The first recorded sighting of these since confirmed Inuit tribesmen was in Orkney in 1682. Sounds reasonable, right? But there's a huge problem with that assertion. The Inuit people did not begin their migration from Alaska across the Arctic tundra until well over 1,000 years after the incident took place. It, in every way, shape, and form, could not have been the Inuit people. The inhabitants of America's Arctic region at the time were members of the Dorset culture, descendants of people who migrated from Asia across the Arctic tundra in about 4000 BC. However, perhaps due to geographic isolation, they experienced a technological decline well before 62 BC. The original immigrants arrived with bows and arrows and presumably boats. But by the time their descendants evolved into the Dorset culture in 500 BC, the tribes ditched bows and arrows entirely, and instead focused on hunting sea mammals that breathe through holes in the ice. There is not a whole lot of evidence they used boats at all. Thirdly, Pliny the Elder describes the Indians as having arrived as a result of the initial intention to engage in commerce, which one can imagine implies their vessels would have been suitable to carry far more goods on board than that of a then supposed non-existent Dorset-era fishing kayak. Continuing this train of thought that the Native Americans were not people of the Arctic, if we venture just a bit further south down the North American eastern seaboard, to regions inhabited by humans for well over 10,000 years, we find the Algonquian language family prominent in New England and present as far south as North Carolina. The Algonquian language family was comprised of dozens of unique tribes who spoke a similar dialect, traded with one another, and utilized advanced methods of canoe design and construction. For the sake of this investigation, I will continue under the presumption the Native Americans who allegedly arrived in Europe were from North Carolina. The history-shattering, mind-numbing question remains, how did they get from America into the English Channel? Let's examine this chart of currents in the Atlantic Ocean, particularly the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream lies just a dozen or so miles off the outer banks of North Carolina. According to Pliny the Elder, the Indians sailed from India for the purpose of commerce. North Carolina, being the southernmost location of the Algonquian-speaking people, were a tribe in this locality such as the Roanoke or Croatan. To engage in commerce with fellow Algonquian tribes, they would typically have ventured north by foot or canoe to do so. Over centuries of embarking upon such commercial expeditions, they likely grew familiar with one of the brightest shining stars in their night sky, the North Star, and developed an understanding that fellow Algonquian people could be found along the coast, traveling in the direction of that blazing North Star. After reaching a point in the ocean far enough to avoid the waves, the Native Americans told their captors they were driven by tempests to Europe. Although no hurricanes have ever been known to hit Britain, from time to time, their winds do. North Carolina does not share the same fate. North Carolina is one of the states most susceptible to hurricanes. With a coastline that juts out into the Atlantic, the state is like a catcher's mitt, catching these storms as they move north. All things considered, the concept of ancient Native Americans traversing the coast of North Carolina by canoe, getting thrown off course by an unexpected storm, and carried into the nearby Gulf Stream is possible and probably happened on who knows how many occasions throughout history. Furthermore, if they turned south or about any direction other than northeasterly, our rowers would have immediately encountered staunch resistance from the current beneath them, and courtesy of sheer exhaustion, presumably submitted to the strength of the Gulf Stream, correcting course to go with the current, in which cardinal direction, identifiable per the North Star, the tribes with whom they engaged in trade resided. I have portioned the 3,636-mile journey between Morehead City, North Carolina, and Le Havre, France, into 3 parts, each in accordance with the ocean currents the Native Americans' boat would have naturally been pulled over. Exerting a row force equivalent to 4 miles per hour, downstream a surface current flowing at 4 miles per hour would mean the men in the canoe were moving through the ocean at 8 miles per hour. For comparison, imagine a flat conveyor belt at the airport moving at a constant speed. If you stand on the belt, you are moving at the rate the belt is moving. If you begin walking, your body is moving through space at the rate at which you are walking, plus the speed of the conveyor belt beneath your feet. Let's say they mustered the energy to move through the ocean at 8 miles per hour for 8 hours a day and spent the remaining 16 hours of the day resting, fishing, eating, or catching water from the storms overhead. Remember, even when they are not rowing, they are still being carried along by the surface current. Under such conditions, being pulled by the 4-mile-per-hour Gulf Stream current, they would have traveled from Morehead City, North Carolina, to the point the Gulf Stream turns into the North Atlantic current in 17 days. On the second leg, being pulled by the 2.3-mile-per-hour North Atlantic current, they would have traveled from the start of the North Atlantic current to the Celtic Sea, about the mouth of the English Channel, in 12 days. On the third leg, being pulled by the 1.68-mile-per-hour English Channel tidal current, they would have traveled from the Celtic Sea to L'Avoir, France in 4 days, making the total length of their voyage from Morehead City, North Carolina to L'Avoir, France 33 days. Recent studies have found the Gulf Stream's current is the slowest it has been in at least 1,600 years and has slowed 15% since the mid-20th century alone. In the event the Gulf Stream was flowing 15% faster than it is today, these Native Americans would have completed their voyage in 31 days. The Gulf Stream's speed gradually slows down as it heads to the north. The changes are much more abrupt with depth. When the wind cannot reach further into the depth of the ocean water, the flow is substantially reduced. How much the winds from a powerful storm or hurricane, like the ones that commonly pass through North Carolina as they head northeast, could impact the flow of the Gulf Stream is worth considering. If a storm's winds increase the Gulf Stream's adjusted average surface current speed of 4.6 miles per hour by 10% to 5.06 miles per hour, that means our Native Americans in the canoe would have made it from Morehead City, North Carolina to L'Avoir, France in 29 days, on to food and water. Pliny the Elder writes the men left their native lands on an oceanic journey to engage in commerce. It's not unreasonable to think the merchants brought some food and water to hold them over until they reached their destination. One can also imagine that among the goods they intended to trade were additional food reserves. With regards to water, these travelers clearly testified they were driven by tempests to European shores, the S making that word plural, meaning at various points throughout their journey, they must have had the opportunity to drink rainwater falling from the sky, as well as capture it in whatever containers or objects they brought with them. It's also not hard to conceive the seamen packing fishing equipment on the canoe. Given their position above the Gulf Stream, a hotbed of fish migrating through the Atlantic Ocean, they would have had the opportunity to experience some insane catches. The sort of catches people to this day pay to encounter off the coast of North Carolina. I am in no way suggesting these guys were eating and drinking good, or that they weren't in near dire condition when they washed ashore in Europe. But what I am saying is when taking into account the anthropology, geography, meteorology, oceanography, and marine biology related to this alleged voyage, it's possible the ordeal played out to the tune of Pliny the Elder's ending. Whether these sailors landed on the coasts of modern-day Germany, France, or the Netherlands, whatever village they stumbled into would have, unfortunately, treated them as a curiosity, a spectacle of sorts. They must have caught the eyes of an onlooker who transported them to an educated or powerful individual that could discern information about them. It's not hard to imagine they were tossed around these elite circles until making their way to the nearby king of Swaby, who was on a quest for territorial expansion. That king, Ariovistus, as documented, passed them along as a gesture of good faith to the governor of a neighboring Roman province. The writings of Julius Caesar, Cicero, Strabo, and the more contemporary author Adrian Goldsworthy each support the accuracy of the historical context Pliny the Elder provides. After the exchange, our Native American explorers disappear from the historical record. Again, I am left with one question. If it is possible, and it was documented as fact with accurate historical context by an otherwise reliable source, well then, what would be the reason that it didn't happen? Alrighty everybody, that's gonna do it for today's video on the ancient North American discovery of Europe. Let me know, who were these people that Pliny the Elder wrote about? Were they from America or some other part of the world? Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.